Well, we are so excited to welcome Harnarayan Singh to the show. He is the host and play-by-play commentator for Hockey Night in Canada Punjabi. Welcome, Harnarayan. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, guys. Thanks.
Good to meet you.
The book is One Game at a Time, My Journey from Small Town Alberta to Hockey's Biggest Stage. It is an incredibly fun and inspiring read. And as much as the book details your hockey broadcasting career, there's also a lot of talk about family, the importance of relationships, and resiliency. And you mentioned in the book how you always admired your mom and dad and how they really held on to their faith and culture, despite being one of the only visible minorities in the small town of Brooks, Alberta. It sounds like that went a long way in shaping who you are in terms of your work ethic, your integrity. So maybe just some standout moments from your parents when you were growing up.
Yeah, well, thank you first and foremost for the kind words about the book. I'm really glad you enjoyed it. In terms of my parents, I'd say that, because I was in a situation where I was very different from the rest of the people in the small town of Brooks and the rest of my classmates. I was, early on when I'd hear stories about how it was for my parents when they came much, much earlier in the 60s, I would always kind of reflect on that and use it kind of as a way to motivate myself to get through challenging times where, I would think that, okay, if I have it bad right now, or if, I'm struggling through this, or this is a challenge for me, I can't even imagine what it would have been like for my parents in the 60s when they came, when people hadn't, even heard of a turbine, let alone seeing one in southern Alberta. And the way that they were able to still maintain their faith, their heritage here in those days is just, I find it very admirable. We've heard, I did growing up, I saw relatives, I learned of history from our community where people had just come and very easily just assimilated into every aspect of the majority, right? And so here you have my parents who are practicing members of the Sikh faith, and so they look very different. They wear it on their sleeves with the turbans, but they're vegetarian as well in that small town that had the biggest meat packing plant in North America. Quite the situation there too. But then just some of the specific incidents of their very first Halloween in 1967 when my parents were there together and, had no idea what to expect, but they came here as teachers. So from school, they had heard about something was going to happen that night. And so my mom's in the kitchen trying to prepare something that they would give out to people who come. But at the same time as that's going on, their house gets egged. And it's kind of like that. It's kind of like that roller coaster of, they received a lot of love and support from people, but then there was also always curiosity, but then sometimes it would almost be, and now we've learned to call it what it is, racism. And I had to kind of become comfortable in my own skin. I was very lucky to have that example from my parents and the support, especially when I'd come home from school and classmates would have asked me all sorts of questions about my appearance and my faith, and I was the only one like that. But my parents always taught me not to make it confrontational and to use it as an opportunity to teach others about who we are. And so I was very lucky, both of them being teachers, now retired, but just that mentality of education, it really helped shape me who I am today.
And if it wasn't clear already, I mean, hockey was everything in your life growing up too, right? Like that was your biggest passion. That becomes quite clear when you're reading the book. And your obsession with Wayne Gretzky, let's say, is a healthy one. And I think that still remains till this day, especially as an Alberta kid. You worshipped him and had the chance to meet him a couple times too as a kid. I literally laughed out loud about the story where he was participating in that golf tournament and you kind of you attended and actually were yelling out to him, like very ballsy, Harnarayan.
Yeah. Well, us broadcasters kind of have that personality where we talk too much, right? And sometimes it can be to the detriment, or sometimes it can be to the benefit. And so, the obsession for hockey was pretty spectacular. I would say pretty unrivaled in that town of Brooks, even though I wasn't playing organized ice hockey. The next best thing is being a broadcaster. I had a very, an attraction to being the voice of the game. I loved what the broadcasters were doing, and I was emulating. I still have that toy microphone behind my left shoulder here, where that's the microphone I used to use to emulate the broadcasters, call games, host my own NHL awards, and do interviews and press conferences pretending to be the coach and the media at the same time, the general manager, imaginary teams, players. And I was trying to make my teams even multicultural at the time. I needed to have French players on my team. So I remember, looking off of a shampoo bottle and looking at the French language there and making an imaginary name just so I had a diverse team at the time, not realizing what I was doing though, obviously. But yeah, the hockey card collection. So to answer your question properly, it was because, yes, Wayne Gretzky and the Edmonton Oilers and the Calgary Flames at that time when I was growing up in Alberta, they were the two best teams in the NHL. It was the best rivalry, one of the best rivalries in the history of the game of hockey. And it was so in your face. It was so prevalent. Every time you would look at a newspaper or turn on the TV, it was everywhere. And I think that helped fuel the passion. My sister Gurdeep, who I talk about in the book, and we're very close, and she really helped kind of fuel that passion as well. And we had a Wayne Gretzky shrine in our bedroom. Every inch of space on my bedroom wall and door was all full of hockey, posters and stickers and everything. And so, yeah, the obsession for Gretzky was such that I get into some fun stories. That chapter is one of my favorites, called Wayne's World. And we were, January 26th, his birthday, like in Brooks, Alberta, we had a prayer ceremony where my parents would make the same sweet pudding, the holy pudding that they would for our birthdays, and they were good sports about it, and did that for Gretzky's birthday. And then, of course, meeting him when he came as a player, every time we met him, and then after he retired, and you mentioned that story about the charity golf tournament, he was better than advertised, just so down to earth, so genuine, so respectful of everyone. And again, to my parents who were teaching me 6 scriptures, learning, making sure I was fluent in how to read, write, and speak Punjabi, but then also having me understand translations of the scriptures. And I'm reading that, okay, it's good to be a humble person, and what the character of a good person should be. And meanwhile, I'm seeing Gretzky break all these records, but he's respectful to his parents. He's giving credit to his teammates. He's honoring the people's records he broke. Like all of that, actually, if I reflect back on it, it helped me attract me to who he was, not just as a player, but as a person. So yeah, I became known as that hockey obsessed nut. And, the playoff hockey pools, when I started winning those in junior high, I think that's when my mom really realized that, okay, this he knows his stuff.
I was going to say, I like that you're picking names off the shampoo bottle. I'm just picturing like 6 players named like Pantene Pro V.
That's hilarious. Yeah. I mean, it was the back of it, right? So it wouldn't have been the name, but yeah, it was something. What do you do? It's so funny you brought that up. I mean, the bathroom was my press conference area. Like when I was in the bathtub, that's when I was like, that's when I was at the podium. Be standing there and I could pretend to be the GM or the coach. And then if I'm sitting on the can, that's when it was the dressing room, and it's like I'm addressing the team players, right? And I'm like, okay, we got to figure out this strategy. So, and then the living room was the actual arena. And like I had all my toy cars that would line up every time we'd have an imaginary game. And it was like this huge system. Like there's players I can still, 20 plus players I could still name off to you today that were a part of that imaginary system I had. I don't know.
Amazing.
Weird.
I honestly would pay like money to hear like what the conversations were.
Yeah.
Not only just to see that, but also to hear about like, what must your mother and father have been saying like the first few times they noticed?
Yeah, Harnarayan, right? You coming out? And like I got one more interview.
Yeah. Well, even though my dad was really worried about this, because because he's a math science guy and he's got 7 post-secondary degrees, PhD in math curriculum. He used to go write the diploma exam, create the questions for the grade 12 math diploma exam for so many years. Like to him, to be honest with you, it all seemed like a waste of time, because he didn't think that it would amount to anything. And so his lines of like, you're making your mind into this encyclopedia of hockey. What are you going to do with it? Like, it used to make me think, but I loved it so much. But then he would do things to help me and encourage me. And it's kind of like he's one of those South Asian parents where it's like backhanded compliments, or it's like a backhanded remark that is like, is that support, or is that like, and so he like one day I remember in junior high, my first subscription to the Hockey News, and he decided to get me that. He's a bookworm himself. He loved like Reader's Digest. We had tons, like he had a subscription to that for I don't know how many years. Prevention magazine about nutrition and health. And then when he was scouring, what other magazines he wanted to order or renew, then the Hockey News was there. And I guess he thought that, at least he'd be reading, his son will be reading, and it'll be something for him to do instead of screen time. Screen time wasn't even a thing back then as much, but even the toy microphone, right? Like that, like they knew that I was interested in that. They got that microphone, but even though they were worried about what is this going to amount to, but the backhanded support, I'll give you one more example, is that I'm in high school. I'm trying to figure out what my schedule should be, what classes I should choose. And my dad's the only teacher in the one high school of Brooks that teaches calculus. And there was always this underlying pressure to do good in math. And I'm an English social guy, and my dad would always tell me, you can bullshit through your English and social essays, but you can't bullshit through my math test, right? And I was like, okay. And so I had this worry that I'm not as strong in math, and I don't know if I want to take calculus, but I might have to because he's teaching it, and it might just be this underlying pressure. And so when I went up to talk to him about my schedule, and he I was afraid to bring it up, and he didn't even look up he was marking his other exams. He didn't even look up, and he goes, "You're never going to have to take the derivative of a hockey score. Forget it." And then I was just like, what? Like, did that just happen? Right? Like he I didn't have to take it. But then within him saying I didn't have to take calculus was this hidden support for me to go for the dream of hockey. So, it's pretty fascinating when I reflect on it, how he was. My mom's always been, very supportive in that sense, where it's like, whatever you put your mind and heart to, you're going to be successful. So I've always had that unconditional support from her, and dads are typically different, right? So it's been funny to go back with the book and reflect on all of it.
I find too, like my mom's side is Punjabi, my dad's side is Tamil, but like there's kind of, with South Asian parents, this is like a huge generalization, of course, but there's always this kind of push to get you into one, what they think is best for you. And then for you, like once you become successful doing whatever it is that you're doing, like they look back, they're like, well, I told you to do this the whole time. It was all my idea. It's kind of this like revisionist history that this is my idea.
It's, there was this kind of underlying theme that if it didn't, they were saying that, I'm young enough to give it a shot. This is my passion and my dream, so go for it. But if it doesn't work, you can always switch gears, right? And I would say up until the book came out. So just think about this, like I'm 13, I just finished 13 seasons of Hockey Night Punjabi. This book process has been about 1.5 to 2 years. And up until the book came out, my dad was still saying to me that, you can always go back to teach broadcasting, right? And so he was always spinning it that way, like, maybe you should just consider going to a university and teaching about because this industry is so uncertain. You don't know from season to season what's going to happen. Especially for me being on the Punjabi side, it's not as obviously financially viable as the English side. There's a lot of things to think about. And so there's always been this kind of thing, like, do I need a plan B because of the fact that I'm not on multi-year deals and things like that. So, I'm thankful now since the Benino call, things have started to change. I even gave myself an internal timeline of, okay, if I'm not at a certain place, I might have to actually consider shifting gears. And they're just always trying to be realistic. The other thing is, it normally is, as you'll know then, Aaron, it's doctor, engineer, lawyer. Like those are the main ones, right? The big three. And then for us, it's been teaching because they were both teachers. But it's fascinating when you reflect back and think about everything that was said and how it all came to fruition.
Mm-hmm.